Did you know that one time Charles Luciano made a mistake while making a shipment of $1 million in cash? He left a briefcase behind, and an employee of the railroad company found it. Now this guy, the employee, could have become a millionaire by selling the contents of the briefcase to the press or even to the police, but he didn't. And when Luciano noticed that his briefcase was missing, he offered the man 25 grand just to find it. In fact, if the man had kept quiet about the whole thing, he would have gotten that 25 grand. And maybe even more because there were no serial numbers on the bills. So he could have easily slipped some of the money into his own pockets without anyone ever noticing. But he chose not to. Instead, he gave the briefcase back to Luciano. And when asked why, the man responded, "I never took anything that wasn't mine before." And that's the kind of loyalty we see in today's video. Hi everyone. Welcome to this channel. Today we will be looking at the life of a man who became a Mafia legend. Let's get into it. Joseph Barbera was born on June 5, 1904, in the small town of San Fratello, located in the Italian region of Sicily. His parents, Paolo and Giuseppina Barbera, had a pretty modest lifestyle. His father worked as a farmer and a street vendor, while his mother took care of the household and their 4 children. When Joseph was 6 years old, his family immigrated to Brooklyn, New York. At that time, the Lower East Side neighborhood of Brooklyn was populated by various ethnic groups, including African Americans, Irish, Chinese, and Jews. However, Italians were becoming an increasingly significant part of the community. Growing up in this environment, Joseph learned how to speak English, but he also maintained fluency in his native Italian. This bilingualism would prove useful to him later in life, when he entered the world of organized crime. Interestingly, when he was growing up, there was a prohibition on alcohol, which may have contributed to the rise of organized crime in the United States during that era. At a young age, Joseph became involved in petty crimes such as theft and robbery. In 1920, when he was just 16 years old, he was arrested for burglary and sent to the Manhattan House of Corrections. His criminal activities continued, and he was soon caught in the crossfire of a gang war between rival Italian gangs. This dangerous situation forced his family to move to the safer neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay in the early 1920s. Organized crime in the U.S. was dominated by gangs with Irish and Jewish members. Italian gangsters were considered less significant and were typically employed as soldiers or gunmen by these larger gangs. However, after being released from prison in 1925, Joseph saw an opportunity to advance in the criminal underworld, formed an alliance with 2 other Italian gangsters, Umberto Anastasia and Frank Castellano, and they began working together to take control of the lucrative bootlegging business. But Joseph wasn't just any ordinary gangster. He was known for his intelligence and strategic thinking, which helped him to outmaneuver his rivals. His partnership with Anastasia and Castellano proved to be successful, and they amassed a considerable fortune. By the late 1920s, their gang had grown to include several hundred members, and they controlled a significant portion of the illegal liquor trade in Brooklyn. During this time, Joseph adopted the alias Lucky Luciano. The reasons behind this name change are not entirely clear, but it is believed that he chose the name to reflect his good fortune and success in the criminal world. The name stuck, and he was known by this moniker for the rest of his life. As the years went by, Lucky expanded his criminal empire beyond bootlegging. He diversified his interests into various other forms of organized crime, including gambling, prostitution, and narcotics trafficking. His network extended far beyond Brooklyn, and he established himself as a major player in the national crime scene. However, his rise to power did not come without challenges. In 1930, he was arrested for illegal possession of a weapon and served 6 months in prison. Despite this setback, he continued to build his criminal empire, and by 1935, he was considered the most powerful gangster in the country. But his luck would eventually run out. On May 29, 1936, Lucky was arrested on a charge of promoting prostitution. Although the evidence against him was circumstantial, he was convicted and sentenced to 50 to 100 years in prison. This arrest was part of a larger crackdown on organized crime by the authorities, known as the Valentine Day Massacre. Despite his conviction, Lucky remained a powerful figure in the Mafia, even from behind bars. He continued to direct his criminal activities through a network of associates, and he was able to maintain his fortune. His imprisonment also highlighted the pervasiveness and resilience of the Mafia as a criminal organization. In 1946, after serving 10 years in prison, Lucky was paroled. However, his release was controversial, as many believed that he had used his influence to secure his freedom. Despite the skepticism surrounding his release, Lucky was determined to rebuild his criminal empire. Following his release, he wasted no time in getting back to work. One of his first orders of business was to reconcile with his former associates, who had become his rivals during his time in prison. These negotiations were delicate and dangerous. But Lucky's reputation as a shrewd and ruthless businessman preceded him, and he was able to broker peace deals that allowed him to regain his position of power within the Mafia, with his alliances. Renewed, Lucky turned his attention to rebuilding his criminal empire. He knew that he needed to diversify his interests and expand into new areas of organized crime to maintain his wealth and power. One of his key strategies was to infiltrate and corrupt legitimate businesses such as labor unions, which became a major source of income for the Mafia. In addition to his business dealings, Lucky was also involved in several high-profile cases of grand larceny. For example, in 1947, he was implicated in the theft of $1 million from the payroll of the United Cigar and Cigar Store Employees Union Local 32BJ, an event that became known as the largest payroll robbery in American history. Although he was never convicted for his involvement in the crime, Lucky's fingerprints were found on the stolen checks, and he was identified as the mastermind behind the heist by several witnesses. Despite these setbacks, Lucky continued to thrive in the criminal world. He built a strong alliance with the Genovese crime family and played a key role in the legalization of gambling in Nevada. This move allowed the Mafia to operate casinos and other gambling establishments openly, bringing in a new wave of profits and power to the organization. By the 1950s, Lucky had become one of the richest men in America, with his criminal empire spanning across the country. He owned nightclubs, restaurants, casinos, and even racetracks. He also had a controlling interest in the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the most powerful labor unions in the country. His influence extended beyond the criminal world as well. He was known to have connections with politicians and law enforcement officials who turned a blind eye to his illegal activities in exchange for bribes. Despite his wealth and power, Lucky was always cautious of the authorities, and he made sure to keep a low profile to avoid drawing attention to himself. He also had a reputation for being a generous philanthropist, donating large sums of money to charities and churches in poor neighborhoods. This public image of a benevolent gangster was further enhanced by his close relationship with Frank Sinatra, who often performed at Lucky's private parties and even appeared in a movie produced by Lucky's son. Despite his efforts to keep a low profile, Lucky was once again arrested in 1957 on charges of conspiracy and income tax evasion. The charges were brought about by the McClellan Commission, a government agency created to investigate organized crime. Although he was acquitted of the charges, his reputation was tarnished, and his criminal empire began to crumble. After his acquittal, Lucky went into exile in Italy, where he lived under the alias of Paul Kelly. There he enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, owning several luxury cars and yachts. He also continued to run his criminal operations in the United States through his associates, even from Italy. In 1962, he was indicted in absentia for murder in connection with the 1952 slaying of a waterfront union official, but he was never extradited back to the U.S. to face the charges. In his later years, Lucky became disillusioned with the younger generation of mobsters, whom he felt were not living up to the standards of the old school Mafia. He was particularly critical of their extravagance and willingness to draw attention to themselves. Despite his criticism of the younger mobsters, Lucky himself was known for his flamboyant lifestyle. He loved expensive cigars, fine food, and fast cars. He was also a patron of the arts and was known to have a particular fondness for opera. Lucky died of a heart attack on July 26, 1962, at the age of 58. He was buried in the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, under the alias Charles R. Luciano. Despite his criminal activities, he was mourned by many in the community who saw him as a local hero and a generous philanthropist. Over the years, there has been much debate over whether Lucky Luciano was a ruthless criminal or a shrewd businessman who simply operated outside the law. Some believe that he was a necessary evil who brought order to the chaos of the criminal underworld. Others see him as a cold-blooded killer who had no remorse for his victims. What do you think about Lucky Luciano? You see him as a criminal mastermind or a heartless killer? Let us know your thoughts. If you liked this video, make sure to check out the next one. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all our latest content. Thanks for watching.